It is predicted that on July 11th, 2024, former President Jimmy Carter will die. I do realize that no skeptic will believe that predicting the date of Jimmy Carter's death will be anything more than luck or coincidence, given his age of 99 years old and him currently being in a hospice. That is why it is also being predicted that on July 19th, 8 days after the predicted death of Jimmy Carter, whose name is also James Earl Carter, will be the death of James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King and the voice of Darth Vader. Jimmy Carter was born in 1924 and will die in 2024 because the 24th word, 2424th word, in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word Jesus. Jimmy Carter, JC, hints at Jesus Christ. James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King, who also played King Jaffe Jaffer in the movie Coming to America, is king symbolism. JC, Jesus Christ, is the King of Kings. No rational person will be able to conclude that when Jimmy Carter will die on July 11th and James Earl Jones will die on July 19th, as predicted, that it will be a coincidence or random luck. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that former President Jimmy Carter will die on July 11th. And that his prophetic funeral, in which Trump will sit next to Obama, will be on July 16th. I am predicting that James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King and the voice of Darth Vader, will die on July 19th. I am predicting that Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis on July 22nd. She will be replaced by Michelle Obama. I am predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on July 24th. I am predicting that dirty bombs will explode in Manhattan, New York City, and there will be a large-scale evacuation on July 25th. I am predicting that Israel will bomb Iran on July 26th. I am predicting that on July 27th, 2024, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. July 27th will be a symbolic beginning to the fifth trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. July 27th will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens, and it is probable that on July 27th, Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. At some point, there will be a massive Mary apparition that will deceive the masses, because all Mary apparitions in history have been demons pretending to be Mary. July 27th will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist and 5G frequencies. July 27th will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. I am predicting that on August 2nd, Joe Biden will step down and make Michelle Obama the 47th president. It is predicted that Michelle Obama will make Barack Obama her vice president on August 18th, 2024, and then it is predicted that she will step down and make Barack Obama the 48th president on August 25th. It is predicted that on August 6th, the historic barge that has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River for over 100 years will finally break free and crash over Niagara Falls. I am predicting that on August 10th, Israel will nuke and completely destroy Damascus, Syria. I am predicting that on August 29th, President Trump will die from a heart attack. August 13th will be the date of a catastrophic solar flare from the sun that will knock out the power grid in America that will lead to food shortages. August 15th will be the date of the resurrection rapture, the first of two raptures. The second rapture will be on September 5th. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. If you have already watched this essential introductory information in another video, you can skip ahead 39.5 minutes. The information in this video is showing how God was pointing to the date July 1st in regards to the predicted death of James Earl Carter, former President Jimmy Carter. The prediction being made in this video that James Earl Carter or Jimmy Carter would die on July 1st is 100% correct. The information in this video is valid. God was pointing overwhelmingly to July 1st, 2024, with Jimmy Carter connections. Not only is the information in these videos that predicted July 1st valid, it is extremely important and must be watched. Through the connections God used to point to July 1st, God told important stories and revealed essential knowledge. These videos must be watched. July 1st ended up being a step in the trail of signs that is 10 days before Carter's predicted funeral at the National Cathedral on July 11th, 2024. All right, this email here that I'm reading was originally composed the day after July 1st, and God was also pointing to July 6th, and therefore the signs that revealed adding 10 days to July 1st was believed that it was because that would be the day of the funeral, and that July 6th would be the date of Jimmy Carter's death. It turns out that we received amazing prophetic signs on July 6th as well that confirmed all of the analysis for Jimmy Carter, and this will be explained in another video, so make sure you watch all of the Jimmy Carter videos. There will be, for example, a video dedicated to the prophetic signs that God is using to point to the extremely important prophetic sign that will be the funeral. In other words, the biggest part of the signs, the theme that God is using for Jimmy Carter is involving the funeral, and I'll explain why. It has to do with the lineup of the former presidents sitting in the pew at the funeral, okay? And anyway, it is now believed that, well, the signs confirm it as well, including this 10 days. This 10 days that was for adding to July 1st was to get to the date of Jimmy Carter's death, not his funeral, okay? So this is correct, this 10 days, and I, again, will explain how we get this 10 days from the signs that occurred on July 1st. In just a minute, I'll explain that. Okay, and Jimmy Carter's funeral is predicted to be on July 16th, 5 days after. Now, the rest of this paragraph here, I simply speak about how this movie, which was being pointed to on July 1st, this movie named How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, believe it or not, you'll see this is a movie God pointed to, and believe it or not, if you are new to this, even this concept of God using pop culture, well, get used to it because this is how it works. God is highly involved in the world. That's the thing that surprises people. Even Christians will be shocked to learn how involved God has been throughout the years in history. All right, and that's proven with these prophetic signs, including, and again, this movie, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. It's a movie about do's and don'ts, which is a hint at the 10 commandments. All right, this will be explained. Well, anyway, again, so we received the sign, this movie, it hinted at adding 10 days. We get July 11th. There's far more confirmation than only that. All right, and that's the rest of this paragraph, and I'll just continue on here. The question is, how did God point to this movie, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days? One of the extremely profound ways in which God pointed to July 1st was that it was 1,290 days after the first Israeli took the thing on December 19th, 2020. This was also the day that the leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, took the thing. In the last verses of the prophetic book of Daniel, there is a mention of a period of 1,290 days following the setting up of a spiritual abomination on the Temple Mount. The Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount is a spiritual abomination, as is the Dome of the Rock. In fact, this is a typo. I really, in fact, mean to refer to the Dome of the Rock. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are the two mosques on top of the Temple Mount, but I'm specifically referring to the Dome of the Rock, the golden dome in the iconic images of the Temple Mount, the mosque with the golden dome. Okay, so the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount is a spiritual abomination, and it was completed in 688 AD. 688 AD plus 1,290 years was 1978, the year of the Camp David Accords that were brokered by President Jimmy Carter. The giving back of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt with the Camp David Accords was an extreme transgression against God. In the prior verse in Daniel, there is a mention of 1,260 days. 688 AD plus 1,260 years was 1948, the year that Israel was reborn after 19 centuries. In other words, the 1,260-day years connection to 1948 is a second witness that confirms the relevance of adding 1,290 years to 688 AD to get 1978, the big year prophetically for Jimmy Carter. And that is why this number 1,290 is relevant with Jimmy Carter and in context of a spiritual abomination, which is why after the first Israeli and the leader of Israel took the spiritual abomination, which is the thing, was July 1st. And this was one, again, of the ways that God was, extremely profound ways in which God pointed to July 1st in regards to Jimmy Carter. Here is the text that I was referring to in Daniel chapter 12, the last chapter of the very prophetic book of Daniel, in the last verses. Here's this 1,290 days I was mentioning. And again, from the prophecy in Ezekiel, where God told Ezekiel to do something for a number of days that it would symbolize a number of years, we know that this can be interpreted as a period of years. And anyway, we are also here in this passage, there is a mention of this abomination, all right? So there's a spiritual abomination happening in this passage in context of the 1,260 days. What I am referring to, of course, is not the primary fulfillment of this prophecy. This is just a symbolic secondary fulfillment that God is using in his big picture of signs. It's very important. We are talking about the mark of the Antichrist, and then 1,290 days later, we get July 1st, but that's a parallel with the abomination, because this is talking about the Temple Mount. It's talking about the regular burnt offering, which is what the ancient Jews used to do on the Temple Mount. It's talking about the temple, the Jewish temple, and it's talking about an abomination. And today, the Dome of the Rock sits directly on top of where the former Jewish temple stood. The Jews would love, or the Orthodox religious Jews would love to rebuild the temple, and they can't because the Dome of the Rock is there, because it is an abomination. And that was completed in 688 AD, and when we add the 1,290 years, we get 1978, which was the year of the abomination orchestrated by Jimmy Carter, with the pressure to have Israel return land for peace, the biggest transgression against God. here is the 1,260 days I mentioned. It's mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy. Sometimes it's mentioned as 1,260 days, and sometimes it's mentioned as time, times, and a half time. That's because the time is 1 year, and times is 2 years, and a half time is a half year. So that's a total of 3.5 years. And in biblical prophetic years, a year is 12 months of 30 days each. And so 3.5 years is 1,260 days. And if we add this to the Dome of the Rock, just like we added the 1,290 days, we get 1948, the year that Israel was reborn. And you can't get 1948 in the Bible unless it is the inspired word of God. What I meant a minute ago about what Jimmy Carter did with the Camp David Accords, which is when Israel gave back the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, what I meant by it being the biggest transgression is that this is the biggest transgression that the world collectively will do in the end. The division of Israel and the making of Jerusalem an international city led by a world body led by the Antichrist, Pope Francis and Barack Obama. There are 2 Antichrists. Now, upon further consideration, I need to be more precise about what I said earlier about this 1,290 days that I'm describing not being the primary fulfillment. What really needs to be said is that, contrary to what most people that are interested in Bible prophecy still believe, is that these numbers of days are actually literal, and they are to have a literal fulfillment. They are only symbolic, and they are used in multiple ways. And this is, again, one way. And I would actually say that this is the primary way because of what is now known, which is that the 1,290 days before the Day of Atonement, the day of the Lord's return, was in 2021. And there was no symbolic beginning. There was a symbolic 1,260 days beginning on May 2nd, 2021, which is explained in other videos. But this is actually a primary fulfillment. And one thing to add to this is because the next verse speaks of this 1,335 days, and what it is referring to is the date, the event of the resurrection rapture. And that will be 1,335 days after the same starting point that we add the 1,290 days to, which again was December 19th, 2020, the date that the first Israeli and the Israeli leader took the spiritual abomination, the mark of the Antichrist. 1,335 days after that date is August 15th, and that will be the date of the resurrection rapture, the first of 2 raptures, the first fruits rapture. The second rapture will be on September 5th. And the prediction being made in this video will prove this. And this is the purpose of this prediction that is from God. Make no mistake, I know far better than you the reason for this prediction. It is to prove that the resurrection rapture event will be on August 15th, 1,335 days after December 19th, 2020. And anyway, this is how important July 1st is. God pointed to this. You'll see as I will explain. And it is, July 1st was 1,290 days after the spiritual abomination in Israel. And also, this is how creative God is. If we think about it, this is one major reason why God established July 1st as a step in the trails of signs that are leading to the death of Jimmy Carter. Like I said, it was clear God was pointing to July 1st, and you'll see, I'll explain what happened on July 1st, and you will agree. But one reason being for doing that is in order to establish this, what I just mentioned, the extra 45 days. God needed to establish July 1st in order to add the 45 days, which will also be explained, by the way, in these videos. And that could only have come through establishing July 1st and this 1,290 days connection related to Jimmy Carter. In other words, God wanted to establish and prove that the resurrection rapture event will be on August 15th, 1,335 days after the abomination was taken in Israel, the first one. And that needed to be done with this context of the abomination and the 1290 days getting us to July 1st. So there you have it. That's one reason for what I'm about to be explaining, which is what happened on July 1st. Because of this connection, it was expected that there would be a prophetic sign involving a spiritual abomination and the Antichrist, if Jimmy Carter were to not die on this date. So if Jimmy Carter if it isn't the end of the trail of signs leading to the death of Jimmy Carter, it means that it would be a step, and therefore we would expect a sign involving a spiritual abomination and the Antichrist on this July 1st date. God is demonstrating that Jimmy Carter is symbolic of the first of 7 kings in Bible prophecy. In Revelation chapter 17:11 in the Bible, there is a mention of a series of 7 kings followed by an 8th king. A secondary fulfillment, a secondary symbolic fulfillment of this prophecy, not the primary fulfillment of this prophecy, is Jimmy Carter, who was inaugurated in 77, as in 1977, began a succession of 7 presidents that leads to the identification of the Antichrist, who is the 6th and 8th presidents, and therefore the symbolic 6th and 8th kings in the prophecy. The name Barack Obama is equal to 68 in simple English gematria, which is A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, etc. And therefore, his name in a succession of presidents that begins with Carter, Barack Obama is the 6th president and is predicted to become the 8th president, which is why his name equals 68 in simple English gematria. Trump is the 7th president after Carter was inaugurated in 77, which is why Trump was elected by 77 electoral votes, and on Trump's inauguration day, in the year that ended in the number 7, he was exactly 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. 77 days after his inauguration, Trump launched 59 missiles into Syria. 59 is the 7th super prime number. The 17th prime number is 59, and 17 is the 7th prime number, making 59 the 7th super prime number. Ancient Rome was founded after a period of 7 kings that ended in 509 BC, which is why, incidentally, the reason for the 7 kings in this Bible prophecy is it is because the primary fulfillment of it identifies Rome. Okay, so in ancient Rome, it is widely known in ancient history, or rather, it is widely known that ancient history tells us that ancient Rome was founded after a period of 7 kings that ended in 509 BC. 509 hints at 59, the 7th super prime number. At Carter's funeral, the presidents will be lined up in chronological order, which will point to this prophecy in Revelation about a chronological order of 7 kings, followed by an 8th king. Trump, the 7th king, and Obama, the 8th king, are predicted to sit next to each other at Carter's funeral. In the prophecy, it is said that the 8th king was, is not, and will be again. Obama was the president, is not the president, and it is predicted he will become the president again on August 25th, 2024. The predicted funeral on July 11th will be exactly 509 days after Carter first went into a hospice, and this hints at the succession of kings in Rome that ended in 509 BC. George W. Bush will also be sitting in the row of presidents at Carter's funeral, and Bush will turn 78 years old in other words, his 78th birthday, will be the date it is predicted that Jimmy Carter will die, on July 6th. His age of 78 will hint at the 7th and 8th kings in the prophecy. George W. Bush is the 5th king in this fulfillment of the prophecy, and it's only symbolic, and it's a secondary to the primary one, as I said, but George Bush was the 5th king after Carter in this fulfillment of the prophecy, and the prophecy speaks of the first 5 kings being similar and having left the scene before the 6th through 8th kings. As mentioned, on July 1st, it was expected that either Jimmy Carter would die or there would be prophetic signs that provided king and spiritual abomination symbolism. On July 1st, the Supreme Court ruled that the president is entitled to immunity from prosecution for official acts of his duties as president. President Biden is not the symbolic 8th king in this prophecy because he is a puppet of Obama's people in the permanent government ruling class of Democrats in Washington, otherwise known as the deep state. In response to the Supreme Court's decision, acting President Biden delivered a speech about how America was founded on the notion that it would not have kings, which is ironic and prophetic because, like everything the left claims these days, the opposite is true, and Biden, the puppet of Obama and his people, is America's first king dictator. Also, in the Supreme Court's dissenting opinion, Justice Sotomayor, Obama's first appointee, said that America now has a king. She used the word king for America's leader on the date it was expected there would be a symbolic Antichrist king sign. Prior to July 1st, we also expected a sign with spiritual abomination symbolism. On this date, famous Hollywood screenwriter Robert Towne died at the age of 89. Robert Towne died on July 1st, this date that we were expecting a spiritual abomination. And he died at the age of 89. Robert Towne died at 89, exactly 1,711 days after the death of famous Hollywood movie producer Robert Evans died at the age of 89. So they both died at the age of 89. 89 is the 24th prime number. These two men worked together in Hollywood, and their two deaths at the age of 89, which hints at the 24th prime number, hints at Jimmy Carter, who was born in 24, as in 1924, and will die in 24, as in 2024. Jimmy Carter's initials, JC, hint at Jesus Christ, and G2424 in Strong's Greek Bible Concordance is the word Jesus. Robert Towne's death on 7/1, July 1st, 7/1, 1,711 days after the death of Robert Evans, hints at the prophecy in Revelation 17:11 about the 7 kings followed by an 8th king. All right, so the 1,711 days hints at Revelation 17:11, which is why Robert Towne died on the day the Supreme Court Justice said that America now has a king. This hints at the coming Antichrist king, who will be defeated by the King of Kings at his second coming in 2024. If the starting date is not included in the calculation, this period of 1,711 days in between the deaths of Robert Evans and Robert Towne is also 1,710 days, and 171 is the 18th triangular number, and 18 is equal to 6 plus 6 plus 6, and 666 is the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. In Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist's rule is symbolized by 7 years. Robert Evans is credited with making Paramount Studios a major success after ruling as its chief for 7 years, as in the Antichrist's period of 7 years. Robert Towne won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay for his movie Chinatown, which Robert Evans produced. The movie starred Jack Nicholson, and during its production, Nicholson learned from a reporter that his deceased sister and mother were in reality his mother and grandmother, which was an eerie coincidence, given that in the movie, which Nicholson was filming at the time of him learning this, Nicholson's character learns the shocking secret that Faye Dunaway's character is both the sister and the mother of another character as a result of incest with her father at the age of 15. The movie was directed by Roman Polanski, who is known for the sexual relationship he had with a 13-year-old girl. Polanski's pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, was murdered by Manson family members. Polanski directed the movie Rosemary's Baby, which Robert Evans also worked on. The horror movie Rosemary's Baby is about a pregnant woman who gives birth to the baby Antichrist. In the movie, the baby has the eyes of his father, Satan, and the baby is an abomination. Robert Evans died exactly 2,620 weeks after the release of Rosemary's Baby, and 262 is the 84th semi-prime number. The name Obama is equal to 84 in Hebrew gematria, and Obama was born, the Antichrist was born, as in Rosemary's Baby's Antichrist birth, on the date 8/4. Therefore, the movie Rosemary's Baby connects to the death of Robert Evans, and his death connects to the death of Robert Towne on the date that it was expected that there would be a prophetic sign involving a spiritual abomination. Robert Evans's last movie that he produced was How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, which is why it is predicted that Jimmy Carter's prophetic funeral, in which the presidents will be lined up in chronological order, will be 10 days after the death of Robert Towne, which was the same day that the Supreme Court Obama appointee said that America now has a king, as in the Antichrist king, Barack Obama. What is also amazing is that on July 1st, the date that we were expecting a sign involving Jimmy Carter and his death, was the day that the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library announced that for Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday celebration, the library is planning to have a film festival, a movie festival, and the festival will be running from 10 a.m. until 10 p.m., which hints at the movies that I just mentioned, including the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. In other words, the 100th birthday celebration with a film festival hints at the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. 100 hints at the number 10. What is also interesting too is that Jimmy Carter set up the Georgia State Film Office after the success of the movie Deliverance during the time that Jimmy Carter was the governor. Georgia went on to become a place where movies are made, and this started when Jimmy Carter was the governor of Georgia. Deliverance hints at the deliverance from the Antichrist of God's faithful through JC, which is why Jimmy Carter's initials, JC, hint at Jesus Christ. Robert Towne got his start in movies through working under Roger Corman. Roger Corman is said to be the Pope of pop cinema, the spiritual godfather of the new Hollywood and the king of cult. Corman is also known for his Poe cycle of 8 movies. These 8 movies were inspired by 8 different writings of Edgar Poe. Roger Corman hints at how Pope Francis is the 7th king and how a revived Roman Empire is the 8th king in the primary fulfillment of this prophecy in Revelation regarding the 5th through 8th kings. This is why Roger Corman died 58 days before it is predicted that Jimmy Carter will die on July 6th, 2024. In the secondary fulfillment of this prophecy, Obama is the 8th king, and 8 movies in the King of Cults Poe cycle also hints at 4+4 and the 44th president. Robert Towne also wrote the screenplay for the Tom Cruise movie Days of Thunder. The name Barak in Hebrew means lightning. In Luke 10:18 in the Bible, Jesus said that he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. The name Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. Barak means lightning, Bama means high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven, as it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place, and O, in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, is the word from. And so Barack Obama means lightning from heaven. Either Jesus didn't know what he was saying when he said this, or he knew that there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and said this anyway, knowing that it would confuse us, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. Obviously, the latter option is the only one that makes any sense. Days of Thunder was released on June 27, 1990, exactly 34 years and 1 month before what is predicted to be Seven Thunders Day on July 27, 2024. July 27, 2024 will be a symbolic beginning of the 7 thunders of judgment that are mentioned in the book of Revelation. In other words, 7/27 or July 27, 2024 will be the beginning of the Days of Thunder. The 7 thunders will be supernatural phenomena such as demons pretending to be aliens and the demonic possession of the masses. 34 years and 1 month hints at 341, the 110th semi-prime number, and 110 is symbolic of the walls of security of Jericho that collapsed in God's judgment. Joshua, who led the Israelites before the walls collapsed, died at the age of 110, and this is why the Twin Towers that collapsed on 9/11 were 110 stories high. 34 years and 1 month is also 409 months, and 409 is the 40 plus 40th prime number, which hints at the 44th president, whose name means lightning. And again, this 409 months is a connection from the release of the movie Days of Thunder. To confirm his signs and connections, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 together, as the 44th president is also the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school. Robert Towne's Days of Thunder cost 2 times 30 million, which hints at 23, to make, and it was released 44 days before the release of Robert Towne's sequel to his Chinatown movie, The Two Jakes. More than a decade after the release of the movie Chinatown, Robert Towne and Robert Evans collaborated again on a sequel named The Two Jakes. It is said that The Two Jakes faced a troubled production and went through several years of development hell. The name the two Jakes hints at the two Antichrists. The two Roberts that made the two Jakes further confirms this. A sequel movie is symbolic of the second presidency, a sequel for Barack Obama, the second of the two Antichrists in Bible prophecy. The Two Jakes was directed by Jack Nicholson. This hints at the Antichrist directing the persecution of the saints in order for God to purge them of their Nicolaitan doctrine that the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians hold and practice, and that Jesus said would come to make war on with the sword of his mouth, on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this Nicolaitan doctrine. Make sure that you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel and read the links that will be in the description box below this video. The reason for the coincidence in the names of Robert Towne winning the Academy Award for Best Screenplay for the movie Chinatown is that Robert Towne and Chinatown point to China. China is symbolic of the red dragon in Bible prophecy that is a metaphor for Satan and his representative, the Antichrist. There is another prophecy in Revelation in which the second of the two Antichrists, Barack Obama, is said to speak like a dragon. This is because Barack Obama and his allies on the political left constantly speak lies while accusing their opponents of lying and doing the very things that they are doing, which is textbook communist strategy that Barack Obama learned from his days studying radical, subversive, leftist political strategy. The truth is, Barack Obama was a member of the May 19th Communist Organization, which bombed the Capitol building in Washington in 1983. The organization was disbanded in 1985, the year that Obama moved to Chicago to further pursue radical leftist politics. The purpose of this prediction in this video, that is from God, is to prove what I have just said. The reason why the name China is pointed to through Robert Towne and Chinatown is because it hints at the movie The Manchurian Candidate. In the 1962 movie The Manchurian Candidate, the protagonist's name is Marco, and the movie was directed by John Frankenheimer, who was said to be the last of the dictatorial style of directors. The name Frankenheimer hints at Frankenstein, and he also directed Island of Dr. Moreau, about genetic experiments that create half-human, half-animal creatures. The production of the movie Island of Dr. Moreau is said to have been the most cursed movie ever made, and interesting documentaries have been made about this. The name Marco and Frankenheimer from The Manchurian Candidate hints at the mark of the Antichrist that changes a person's chromosomes, making them an Obama nation, as in abomination. The mark of the Antichrist has inserted snake venom chromosomes into people's chromosomes, which is what is alluded to with the half-human, half-animals in Island of Dr. Moreau. This makes these people an abomination, as in Obama nation. The number 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, and Frankenheimer's The Manchurian Candidate cost $2.2 million to make. John Frankenheimer died exactly 22 years before it is predicted that Jimmy Carter will die on July 6, 2024. At Carter's funeral, Joe Biden will sit in the row of presidents, followed by Trump and Obama. Biden and his brain dementia is symbolic of the character in the Manchurian Candidate that is brainwashed by communist operatives within the US government and who isn't fully aware of what he is doing. Obama is symbolic of the communist Manchurian Candidate in the movie The Manchurian Candidate, who is waiting for the death of someone in order to gain the president's office and usher in an authoritarian regime in the US. This awaited death will be the predicted death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash on July 22nd, 2024, which will be 4 times 4 days, which hints at the 44th president, after the predicted death of Jimmy Carter. The movie The Manchurian Candidate was released 446 days after the birth of Barack Obama. 446 hints at the 44th president and the 46th president. And the characters in the movie The Manchurian Candidate point to these presidential candidates. Hello, welcome. Where to begin? For many months now, this channel has been speaking about the date August 13th regarding what God is pointing to as being the date of the solar flare, the catastrophic solar flare that will ultimately send a coronal mass ejection towards Earth that will knock out America's power grid. God has overwhelmingly pointed to this. Words cannot describe how amazing the information is with the multitudes of connections from his big picture of signs that is only being explained on this channel. And that said, at the same time, God has been also overwhelmingly with the most beautiful imaginable connections to this same date, August 13th, as being the date for the first fruits rapture. What do I mean by first fruits? There will be 2 raptures, the harvest of the first fruits and the harvest of the wheat, for those that know what I'm talking about. And the second of the 2 raptures will be on September 5th. And so God has overwhelmingly pointed to August 13th for this as well. But I know God and how he has put together his big picture of signs well enough by now to know that that doesn't necessarily mean that it is the date of the rapture. It is so hard to imagine how God would do this, but I know him now and I know how he works. It seems like, as one friend put it way back in early 2018, overkill, when he pointed to a particular date. In fact, it was the spring equinox. He pointed to that in an overwhelming way, and after we only received a relevant and prophetic sign, we thought it was overkill. But that's because we didn't at that time appreciate that this is how God works. All right, but to say that God is pointing to August 13th with overkill is not really the right way to put it. It's so beautiful, but the reason why I believe now he is pointing to August 13th for the rapture is because it is the day of the solar flare. It isn't the date of the rapture because the rapture will be on August 15th. Well, actually, to be more precise, I believe it is very likely, in fact, I do believe that it's overwhelming, the evidence, that the rapture will occur on the 15th Israel time and on the 14th US time. All right, so August 14th is in fact the date of the rapture for those in the US. And I believe it will be approximately at midnight, hence the midnight cry in Matthew 25. It is said that solar flares, or rather coronal mass ejections that are a result of solar flares, speed through space, and they take time to reach Earth. The fastest ones take 15 to 18 hours, is what I have read. And so if the solar flare will happen on August 13th, as God is saying it will, through his big picture of signs, and I mean that literally, God is saying that, and it is possible to know these things, as Amos 3:7 says, God does nothing without his servants first knowing. And God is saying that the solar flare will happen on August 13th, but it does take a couple of days, or rather even the fastest ones take a day and a half to reach Earth. And so hypothetically, we can see how easy it is for the rapture to coincide when the coronal mass ejection will hit Earth and the power gets knocked out. And that makes perfect sense. But at the same time, now knowing how God's big picture works of signs, it does make sense that he would point to August 13th in regards to the rapture. But then also confirm that it would be a couple of days later with some other connections, which I'll get into here. And I will be making a lot of videos regarding this information, regarding how God is pointing to August 13th. And there will be these rapture videos talking about the rapture symbolism that is pointing to August 13th, but it won't be, I don't think now, on August 13th. It will be a couple of days later when the coronal mass ejection will hit Earth. And I'll just give you something to start with, and believe me, it is only nothing. It is only, I don't say nothing, but I mean it is only one little thing because of it being a thing among many, many other amazing things. But the date, August 13th, gives us the 13th of the month, and it is the 9th of Av in the Hebrew calendar. I personally spent a few years, a couple of years at least, over 2 years, in an Airbnb setup in Poland where I had been renting a room in which the apartment had 2 other rooms that were vacated and moved in with people from renting on Airbnb on a daily basis. It gave me an opportunity to speak to new people and tell them about the evidence for the God of the Bible and Jesus Christ on a daily basis. And I would do this through using the back door. I would never tell someone, hey, can I tell you about the evidence for Jesus? Because the conversation won't happen, as we know. So I give them probably over an hour worth of information without them even realizing that I'm giving them information that confirms that the Bible is true. But I tell them, I get into this story, I start with the story about how all of the calamities in Jewish history, and for anyone, most people, history is interesting, and especially something like this, because I tell them how, about the coincidence that all of the calamities, and there have been about 12 of them in the last 2,000 years, have all coincidentally started symbolically on this 9th of Av date in the Hebrew calendar. And I tell them how at the end of all of this, it points to Deuteronomy chapter 28, when God said to them, the Jews, as they were entering the promised land, when they reject him in the future, he will, God, chase the Jews around the world from nation to nation by the sword, which is literally what happened. And when the Jews returned to Israel in the 20th century, it was from over 100 countries. They were literally spread out all over the world by being chased around the world by the sword. If we read the text, it's clear that in the prophecy, God is also describing Auschwitz and the Holocaust. It's clear. And just on that note, for just one example, the Grass Action Warsaw policy had an official start date, which was when they rounded up Jews and put them into the ghettos. That memo put forth by the commandant was dated the 9th of Av in the Hebrew calendar. And the date that they first started rounding up Jews and putting them onto death trains to the death camps was also on the 9th of Av in the Hebrew calendar. The reason why for all of these calamities that symbolically began on the 9th of Av is because the first and second temples in Israel, in ancient Israel, were destroyed on the 9th of Av. The Babylonians in the 6th century BC came and destroyed the temple on the 9th of Av. And then the Romans also coincidentally destroyed the temple on the 9th of Av. And the Romans weren't like, hey, let's wait a couple of days because the 9th of Av is coming up and let's do it on the same day that the Babylonians did it. No. And in fact, the history of the Jewish-Roman War had it that that just happened to be the day that the Romans finally broke through the walls that around Jerusalem that they had been trying to break through for a number of days. And so anyway, both of the Jewish temples were destroyed on the 9th of Av, and the temple is symbolic of their relationship with God. Okay, and then the first time they were exiled, it was only to Babylon, and then they returned, as was prophesied. They returned after 70 years and rebuilt the second temple in the 70th year after their exile to Babylon. But then after the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, they were chased around the world, as was promised, after God said they would reject him. And so this brings the question, well, how did the Jews reject God in the first century prior to the destruction of the second temple in 70 AD by the Romans? Because the calamities, again, in all of the history symbolically began on the 9th of Av, and I could go through the list, but it would take a while. And that's because of the first and second temples. And so they were chased around the world after the second temple was destroyed. Well, the question is, again, how did the Jews reject God in the first century AD, just prior to the destruction of the second temple? And the answer is by rejecting God, Jesus. That's how the Jews rejected God, because Jesus claimed to be God, and the Jewish leadership rejected this and had him crucified. And then they were chased around the world for rejecting God, Jesus. And there's no other explanation for how the Jews rejected God in the first century AD before 2nd AD. That's the only explanation that makes any sense. And so as the Jews were being chased around the world from nation to nation on the 9th of Av, God was pointing to the first and second temples that were destroyed on the 9th of Av in order to demonstrate and point to Deuteronomy chapter 28 and their rejection of him, and to point to how they rejected him through rejecting the Messiah, God, Jesus. And by the way, I've had a Jew or a Muslim tell me that Jesus didn't claim to be God, but they are ignorant and have no knowledge at all regarding the New Testament. I can clearly show you the passages where it's very clear that Jesus claimed he was God. And so either Jesus was lying or he was crazy, but no one believes that. Even the atheists say that Jesus was a good person and had wise teachings, so he wasn't a liar or crazy, so obviously he was telling the truth. And anyway, this is only scratching the surface of the evidence for Jesus for anyone that cares to look into it. And that gets us to the purpose of life. It is a test to see who actually cares enough to look into the evidence. And why is that a test? Why is that a relevant test? Because it demonstrates the person's interest in righteousness. because Jesus claimed to be God and claimed to have died in order for that sin could be atoned for, and so that man could be reunited with God. And so that's why it is said that believing is deemed worthy of being deemed righteous. As it is said in the Bible, Abraham was deemed righteous for having faith and trusting God. And so that's why it is a test. It's essentially a test of righteousness. There are many quote-unquote Christians that will also say that that's where it ends, but it doesn't. It's not intellectually agreeing with a particular doctrine that enables us to be saved. We are saved through Christ's Spirit and being born again, and through, after coming to faith, living out the rest of our life with faith. Faith is a doing, it is an action, which is why the second part of salvation was illustrated with Abraham when he was requested by God to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, at which point God said to Abraham to stop as he was about to do it, as God said to him, "For now I know that you fear me." And in other words, God didn't know prior to this. Contrary to what the Gnostic Calvinists say, things aren't predetermined, and God does not know everything, otherwise we wouldn't have free will. And that's what makes us in his image, is the fact that we have free will. God knows all possibilities, but he doesn't know what we will choose. That's why he said to Abraham he didn't know prior to Abraham following through and trusting God with his faith, with his actions. And so demonstrating our faith like Abraham typically involves risk and sacrifice, which is the purpose of the end times period and the test of faith through the Antichrist for Christians that haven't already yet demonstrated their faith through action that involves risk and sacrifice. And we are called to sacrifice our lives, which most quote-unquote Christians have not done yet. They haven't laid down their life and gone into the ground like a kernel and died, like Jesus said, in order to then grow fruit. Being born again implies a death of the self, but in a literal sense, it's not just something that you say. It's not just something you intellectually agree with. Now, I just want to take a couple of minutes to just quickly explain a couple of things here in this video as to how it was first came about, how this discovery is of August 14th and 15th confirmed, how it was first inspired and then confirmed, and how it involves the death of Jimmy Carter, the predicted death of Jimmy Carter tomorrow, July 1st. Today is June 30th. This video will be posted on June 30th. You will be able to see this in the post date for this video. However, there are many other videos that were made and posted many days ago regarding the predicted death of Jimmy Carter on July 1st. So July 1st will be 1,290 days after the first thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist, was given to someone in Israel. Okay? So God has used the first day, the date on which the first American took the thing, okay, which was December 14th, 2020. This date is so very, very important in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. I'll give you one example. The two eclipses, the paths of totality of them, the one in 2017 and the one in 2024, which crossed over each other in the middle of the country and engendered an X over the nation, have point to the dates of these eclipses point to the middle date, which was December 14th, 2020. And this is relevant because X's are a product of two straight lines intersecting each other at their midpoints. Okay, so an X in itself hints at the midpoint. And so the midpoint date of the two eclipses that engendered an X is December 14th. An X is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist, described in Ezekiel chapter 9, would have been a Tav letter, a Tav mark, and in ancient Hebrew, the Tav letter was an X. God has confirmed this in so many ways in his signs that X's are symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. But another main reason why the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by an X is because an X resembles chromosomes. And it is a person's chromosomes that are changed after they have taken the mark of the Antichrist. Which is why, and what makes it a spiritual abomination. A person's chromosomes are sacred. It's like God warning to not change the Bible in the book of Revelation. God warns to not change a single word in the book of Revelation. It's the same thing. You cannot change a single thing in God's design of his chromosomes for people without it becoming a spiritual abomination. And if we read the text properly, Genesis chapter 6 tells us that the flood judgment and destruction and the wiping out of humanity occurred after they had corrupted their chromosomes. So it all is full circle, actually. The protruding amino acid chain, if you think about it, you know what I'm talking about. I'm just using my words carefully. The protruding amino acid chain that is in the thing that people put inside themselves to combat the CVD disease, the protruding amino acid chain is in truth snake venom. There has been research done on the use of snake venom in medicine for many decades now, and this is what the protruding amino acid chain is, and that is what is in the thing. And this thing has it that this snake venom is inserted into a person's chromosomes, and the snake is the big symbol of evil in the Bible and the symbol of Satan. And so that's why Satan has his mark in people who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. And make no mistake, the thing is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It does not need an additional something to go with it, nor does it need an additional form of false religious worship to go with it to make it the mark of the Antichrist, nor does it need a supposed new age of dispensation after supposedly all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the main reasons why most quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is that it is judgment for this doctrine that Jesus said he hates. It is the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day that Jesus said he hates in the book of Revelation and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this Nicolaitan doctrine, which is the doctrine that talks about the dispensation of grace supposedly ending, and then what is written to the seven churches only applying to those that are left behind, etc. Obviously, that is ridiculous because those letters were written to the churches in Asia Minor, but the people that follow the Nicolaitan doctrine simply believe what they want to believe. They do not want to believe what is the Bible clearly saying, and this is just one example. They don't want to believe that what is written to the seven churches applies to them, for example. And so, God hates this. Anyway, in Bible prophecy, a period of 1,290 days is in context of what is described as being an abomination. All right? There is a passage in Daniel chapter 12 that speaks about the setting up of the abomination, and what I am speaking of isn't the literal application for that, but that's how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It's simply symbolism in this context that I'm describing, but nonetheless, 1,290 days appears in context of what, in the same sentence as what is an abomination. And it is an end times thing, this abomination that's being talked about. I won't talk about what it is really talking about literally. We're just talking about this particular connection. And 1,290 days after the first Israeli took the thing, which, if I'm correct, was the day that the leader of Israel took the thing. And I think at the time the leader was Benjamin Netanyahu. And that was December 19th, 2020. Okay? So it was December 14th, the mid-date between the two eclipses, that was the first American, but it was December 19th. Now, December 19th was also the day of another very important prophetic sign involving the space dragon, SpaceX's Dragon crew and the Dragon capsule, which will be explained in other videos. It's very, very important, actually. Well, I'll reframe. It's actually, it regards aliens. Demons will be pretending to be aliens very soon. And this will be another major test for quote-unquote Christians, because obviously if you are a Christian, it's impossible that there be aliens, because Jesus was God and he didn't go around the universe hopscotching, dying on crosses for the sins of other species of aliens. In other words, you're not a Christian if you believe it's possible there be aliens. They're not compatible. But that's why there will be aliens, because it's designed to fool people that don't really have a biblical worldview and are pretty much superstitious about their faith, like the majority of quote-unquote Christians. Okay, so if we add 1,290 days to the day that the first Israeli took the abomination, which is the thing, then we reach July 1st. Now, as you know, maybe, I have made many videos in the past, posted many days ago, talking about how July 1st is the predicted date that Jimmy Carter will die. And that is relevant in the context of Israel, because Jimmy Carter brokered the Antichrist Camp David Accords, when Israel was pressured to return the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. But God said in the Bible that this territory belongs to him, Israel, and the Jews. But this is symbolic because this is what the Antichrist will be doing very soon, leading a world effort to make Israel a divided land and to make Jerusalem an international city. And so that's what Jimmy Carter hints at, which is why he will die 1,290 days after the first abomination was taken in Israel. Now, what is astounding beyond words also is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which sits directly on top of where the Jewish temple once stood, which the spiritual enemy put there because of this. In other words, Satan put the Al-Aqsa Mosque on top of the location where the Jewish temple stood because it is Satan's prerogative to frustrate the restoration of Israel. Okay? So that Al-Aqsa Mosque was completed in 688 AD. And if we add 1,290 years, we get 1978, which was the year of Jimmy Carter's Camp David Accords. And that hopefully has dropped your jaw if I have explained it well enough. Okay, again, we are talking about the predicted death of Jimmy Carter 1,290 days after the first Israeli took the abomination. The number 1,290 occurs in context of the last verses of the last book of the book of Daniel regarding the temple and the Temple Mount. And in fact, it speaks about the abomination that will be set up on the Temple Mount. And it speaks of this 1,290 days. We also know from Bible prophecy that the days are symbolic of years. And when we add 1,290 years to the abomination that is on the Temple Mount, which is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, we get Jimmy Carter and the Camp David Accords, which is about Israel and its land, just as is the Temple Mount is. Because the final stage of the restoration that has yet to occur is the Jews taking control of the Temple Mount and rebuilding the temple, which is going to happen shortly. Because first they got restored and they got a state, but they didn't have East Jerusalem. Then in 1967 they got East Jerusalem, but they still didn't have the Temple Mount. So there's a three-stage process here. There's parallels with this three stages, by the way, in the Bible too. And also there's the three stages of pressing olives to make olive oil and on and on. And there's the three stages of Jesus' crucifixion too, which began in the Garden of Olives. Well, anyway, what I'm saying here, again, I'll just say this again, just to be redundant, just to make it clear. We have in the Bible, in the context of the end and the Temple Mount, a period of 1,290 days. And we know from Bible prophecy that these numbers of days are symbolic of numbers of years as well. Okay, there's the year for a day prophecy rule. I'll just give you a quick example. Daniel chapter 8 talks about the temple and it being restored after 2,300 days. And it talks about the most central or the most important battle in Western history, which was the Battle of Granicus. Had the Greeks lost to the Persians, there wouldn't have been Western civilization. That battle happened in 334 BC. And when we add the 2,300 years instead of days, we get 1967. And if I didn't mention, the reason why that's relevant is because the passage continues to it repeats it over and over about this restoration of the temple. And the Jews recaptured the Temple Mount in 1967. For the first time since Daniel, they had self-rule over the temple, or the East Jerusalem. Well, they had, for one day, or maybe it was 10 days, they had rule over the Temple Mount until they gave it to the Jordanians. And so that fulfilled that prophecy. It was exactly 2,300 years after the Battle of Granicus. And without that connection, there is no purpose for the Battle of Granicus in that prophecy, contrary to what the deluded Jehovah's Witnesses say. Okay, so we have the year for a day rule in Bible prophecy. Now, this 1,290 days, again, is talking about a spiritual abomination, which we know the primary fulfillment of that is what will happen on the Temple Mount. But the mark of the Antichrist, is also a spiritual abomination. And the thing was taken for the first time in Israel on December 19th, 2020. And when we add 1,290 days, we get July 1st, the predicted date of the death of Jimmy Carter. But the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is also symbolic of what is coming on the Temple Mount and a spiritual abomination, because it is in itself a spiritual abomination, when that was completed in 688 AD, and when we add 1,290 years, we get 1978, the year of Carter, and the Camp David Accords, which was an abomination. The biggest transgression against God that's described in the end that the nations will do is exactly what Carter did. This dividing of God's land and giving the land back in the name of peace. But there is no peace with the spiritual enemy. You can't make peace with Satan. And that is the spiritual force behind Islam, obviously. And when this prediction comes to pass, it'll prove Christianity, and therefore it will prove what I just said, that Islam is a force from Satan. And that's why you can't make peace with it. And any attempt to make peace simply emboldens the enemy, because they will never stop. Their goal, the goal of Islam, is to destroy God's people, which includes Israel. For anyone new to all of this and perhaps was confused about the conflict in the Middle East, well, there's a reason why you're confused, or there's a reason why you had the wrong beliefs, is because the only way this conflict can be properly understood, like anything in the world, is through a spiritual perspective. As it says in the Bible, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God, the God of the Bible. And you can't understand this conflict without understanding it from the spiritual perspective. No matter how hard you try, you need to understand what is really going on. And what is really going on is what I just described. And that's why Jimmy Carter was not a man of God. I'm not saying he is not going to make the kingdom, I don't know. But I will say that in God's signs, he is symbolism for the spiritual enemy. And his brand of Christianity in God's signs is not true Christianity. In other words, he was in a way a deceiver, which is why the Democrat Party nominated him, by the way, this obscure governor from nowhere that became the president overnight. It's because they thought it would be a good idea to get this lefty guy that basically has the same values as the secular leftists, but presents himself as a Christian from the South, and so, well, this would be a good image. He's going to get some votes for us that we wouldn't be able to otherwise get, was their thinking. So let's nominate Jimmy Carter, because he has our values, but he's a Christian from the South, it'll fool some people. So that's Jimmy Carter. He symbolizes deception, like Satan, the liar, the king of lies. And that's why Jimmy Carter did what he did with the Camp David Accords. He, at the very least, he didn't understand God's plan and Bible prophecy, like many Christians today, by the way. Speaking of the Jehovah's Witnesses, just for example, they have what's called replacement theology. They believe that the church replaced the Jews in the prophecy, but God doesn't change his mind like that. What God writes is the way it is. He didn't change his mind after the prophecies were written and the church has replaced the Jews in end times prophecy. That's so out there. But prior to the 20th century, you could be forgiven for believing such a thing because it had been 19 centuries since there had been an Israel. But since Israel has been destroyed, someone that still believes in replacement theology has a serious problem with regards to thinking for themselves and not going along with, anyway, like something like a cult, like leadership, like the Jehovah's Witness organization. 79 times in the New Testament, the word Israel is used, and not once does it refer to the church. All right. Now, getting back to what I was saying, and to finish this up here, the 12th chapter of Daniel lists 3 periods of time. The second one is the 1290. And by the way, when we add the first of the three, which is 1260, if we add 1260 years to 688 AD, we get 1948, which is the year of the rebirth of Israel. And so you can't get as clear as day 1948 in the Hebrew Old Testament, written over 2,000 years ago. You can't get the year of the rebirth of Israel and it be an accident. All right? Again, it's clear. For someone who's not Christian, has never opened the Bible, you can open it and go to Daniel chapter 12. And it talks about the end. The title of the chapter is The Times of the End or something to that effect. And it's this last chapter of the very prophetic book of Daniel, and it talks about the end. And it talks about this spiritual abomination that will be set up on the Temple Mount. It's talking about the end, right? And anyway, it talks about a period of 1,260 days, okay? But as I said and explained, there's this day for a year rule in Bible prophecy. And when we add 1,260 years to the year that the Al-Aqsa Mosque was completed in 688 AD, we get the year that Israel was reborn. That isn't the only way from the Bible we get 1948, by the way. Just quickly, in Ezekiel chapter 4, God told Ezekiel, and this is where we get the year for a day rule in the prophetic chapter 4, God told Ezekiel to do a certain thing to demonstrate how Israel was going to be punished for 390 plus 40 days, okay? And God told him that this would be symbolic of 390 years plus 40 years, for a total of 430 years. Now, also in Bible prophecy, it was prophesied beforehand that the Jews would be exiled for 70 years and then would be allowed to return to Jerusalem after the 70-year period, which is exactly what happened, and secular history records this did happen as well. After 70 years, literally, exactly. Okay? So the Jews came back after 70 years, which means that 430 years subtract 70 years leaves us with 360 years. So 360 years was remaining of the punishment. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, the chapter I spoke about earlier, in which God spoke to the Jews before they crossed into the promised land, he told them that if they do not repent when they come back, that he will multiply their punishment times 7. Okay, so 360 years of the remaining punishment when they came back in 536 AD, BC, we get, so 360 years is the remaining of the punishment at the time that they came back in 536 BC. Okay, so 360 years times 7, though, is 2,520 years. In the Bible, a year, a prophetic year, is 12 months of 30 days each. And when we times out 30 days times 2,520, we get a total of 907,200 days. All right, and that number of days, when we add it to the autumn of 536 BC, we get exactly the spring of 1948. You can do that very simply too by dividing the 907,200 days by 365.25. 365.25 because an average year, because there are leap years in which there are an extra day in the calendar. So 365.25, if you divide that into the 907,200 days, you get 2,484.8 years. All right? Now, if you add, they came back in the autumn of 536, so if you do negative 536.25, all right, because it's 536 years back, plus an extra quarter of a year because you're talking about the autumn, and then you add the 2,400, the autumn of 536, if you were to do it into a math equation, would make it negative 537.25. Because you go back a complete 536 years, and then you go one quarter more, you're talking about a negative 537.25. Right? That's how it would work. The beginning, January 1st, 536 BC, would only take you back negative in terms of a math equation to 536. But we're talking about the autumn of 536 BC. So it would be negative 537.25, and then you add the number of years, which again was 2,484.8, and you get 1948.5. And Israel was reborn in the middle of May in 1948. Right? So that's the second way in which we get the number 1948. Now I've told you how we got 1948 twice in the Bible. 1967, I told you about it a minute ago, and from Daniel chapter 8. And we're talking about, in this video, the 1,209, the third of the uses of the 1,200 of the three numbers in Daniel chapter 12, 1,290 to give us 1978. And for many years, I thought, that was interesting, but is really God pointing to the Camp David Accords? Well, yes, but the other dates that you get are like the most important years in modern Israel history. The year that they got the nation back in 1948, they became a nation, and then in 1967, which was the year of the Six-Day War, when for the first time in 19 centuries they had rule over their ancient capital. So 1978 doesn't really qualify as high on a scale as those two dates, those 2 years. And so it was debatable as to whether or not how much God was pointing to 1978, or whether it was just a coincidence that was the year of the Camp David Accords. But when the prediction comes to pass that Jimmy Carter is going to die 1,290 days after the thing was taken in Israel, well, that brings up the 1,290 years connection from the year that the Al-Aqsa Mosque was completed to 1978. This video is, by the way, extremely profound. If you are a Christian, make sure you never ever stop sharing this video on social media. Spend hours every day posting it. Work. I know because of the Nicolaitan doctrine, most quote-unquote Christians have somewhat of a phobia regarding the necessity of works. But Jesus hates this doctrine, and this is a bag of gold. And Jesus warned to Christians that don't do anything with their bags of gold, that they would be banished to hell. So, and our bags of gold, by the way, are representative of our opportunities and abilities. This is a bag of gold. Nothing compares to this video and the prediction of Jimmy Carter's death, and having now explained 4 dates in the Bible that prove the Bible, 4 years in the Bible, and disprove things like Jehovah's Witness, even, and replacement theology and Catholicism, because they don't believe in any of this stuff either. Okay, so now the thing is that there's one last number of days in Daniel chapter 12, which is the last verse of the last chapter of the book of Daniel. And that's a period of 1,335 days. And it says, "Blessed is he who waits for and arrives at the 1,335 days." It's speaking about the resurrection rapture. And now we have the fulfillment of it. Now we know what the 1,335 days is beginning from. It's the date on which the first thing, the abomination, was taken in Israel. And when we add 1,335 days to that date, December 19th, 2020, we get August 15th. Now, I believe that the rapture will occur in the AM on the 15th and on the 14th in the US. Now, one reason for why I believe that'll be the case is God is using Trump, his trumpet that he has been using to trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs, who was born on a Sabbath day, a Saturday, when in synagogues around the world, the portion of the Torah that was read on that day, because they read a different portion for every Saturday of the year, was the portion from the book of Numbers about God commanding the making of the trumpet. And that was the day that Trump was made. It was exactly 23 months before Israel was reborn. The Antichrist is Numbers 23. 2 divided by 3 is 0.666. The basketball president wore jersey 23 in high school. And anyway, Paul, the apostle, used the phrase, the last trump, in reference to the resurrection rapture. President Trump was born on the 14th of the month in June in 1946. This will be 78 years and 2 months exactly to August 14th. All right, 2024, the day of the rapture in the US time zone. And 78 years and 2 months hints at the 782nd word in Strong's Greek Concordance, which is the word that means to greet. Okay, it means to greet. And this is because God's people will be greeting the Lord in the air at this second coming event. And then will forever be with the Lord. It'll be a massive greeting. The rapture and resurrection. And so that's why the significance of greet in terms of the rapture and why it would come from Trump and his birth date. Now, speaking of greeting in the air, in God's signs, Jupiter is symbolic of Christ, the king planet. But it is also symbolic of the body of Christ. Now, it has been known since 2017 that August 14th and 13th, actually, and I'll explain why the 13th. Well, I'll mention it already. It's the 9th of Av in the Hebrew calendar, which was the day that the Second Temple was destroyed, as I was explaining. But the Second Temple, as it says in history, in historic texts, burned into the 10th of Av as well. And so the 9th of Av is the 13th, the predicted date of the solar flare, which will hit later, I believe, late on the 14th and early on the 15th, depending on what time zone you are in. And anyway, the reason this sign in the night sky, in Genesis 1:14, God said that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs. This sign in the night sky has been known to be the Revelation 15 sign since 2017. Since 2017, it was known that this would be the fulfillment in the night sky of what is described in the first verse of Revelation chapter 15, which speaks of a sign in heaven. There is another sign in the night sky that's described in Revelation chapter 12 that was fulfilled on September 23rd, 2017. It was the rapture sign, the once in a human history fulfillment, alignment of the stars in the sky, all right, the planets, and that's explained in other videos, and this is the Revelation 15 sign. And one reason it is known, or was known since this time, is that it occurs on the 9th of Av. But the 9th of Av technically begins on the 12th at sunset and goes to the 13th at sunset. And so the 14th and 15th aren't the 9th of Av. This was another reason why I originally thought that the rapture would be on August 13th, because it just seemed logical that it would be on this date, on a significant Hebrew calendar date. But, like I'm saying, it is the day for the fire. Speaking of the burning of the temple that burned into the 10th, we are talking about fire from the sun that's coming. Okay? That's why the sign is the conjunction with Mars, because Mars is symbolic of war. In ancient astrology, it's symbolic of war and blood. It's the red planet. And this is meaningful. I know, yes, it was ancient astrology, and God isn't into astrology. Are you sure? Do you know what you're talking about? God said that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs. They symbolize things, and why can't God use the symbolism of the ancients to portray what he wants to in the night sky, especially the ancient Jews? Because the ancient Jews definitely observed the night sky. In fact, the wise men that were able to recognize the Star of Bethlehem while everyone else didn't know what they were talking about, as described in Matthew chapter 2, is because they were students of studying God's signs in the night sky through the symbolism contained in the night sky. And part of that, a big part of the star, what was the Star of Bethlehem, which we now know what it was Jupiter, being symbolic of the king planet. And it's retrograde around Regulus, the king star in the king constellation, Leo. Well, anyway, here we have Jupiter conjoining with, and also part of the Star of Bethlehem was its conjunction, the closest, brightest conjunction ever in history of it with Venus, which in the Bible, Jesus said represents him. Are you sure God doesn't use astrology? Okay, is this even astrology, or is it watching for the Lord's signs in the night sky? So this conjunction between Jupiter and Mars is this sign, but what makes it the sign is that it occurs exactly in the middle of the two horns of the constellation Taurus. And in ancient astrology, Taurus was symbolic of the coming judge. And Jesus is returning not as a nice guy, but as the judge. That's why we have, and he's coming to make war with the sword of his mouth, as I mentioned earlier. He's coming to make war on the unrighteous. He is the coming judge. And Jupiter symbolizes Jesus and the body of Christ, which will be raptured on this date of this sign. But he's coming to make war, and that's why it conjoins with Mars in the in between the two horns of the constellation that means the coming judge. All right? Now, if we look at it, the date, so here's the date, right? Arguably, the 13th is also a close conjoining with it, right? Which is why I thought, I overlooked the fact that it's closest on the 14th and 15th. Depending on what time zone, this time zone is UTC time. But on the 13th, too, we have something interesting. It's in between part of the constellation Taurus, which is the Pleiades grouping of stars, which is symbolic of the seven churches, which is what makes this the Revelation 15 sign. Because in Revelation 15, the sign in the heavens is, as it says, I'll just read it in a second here. It says, it speaks of the seven angels. Well, how is that going to be depicted in the night sky? Well, this is how. The Pleiades grouping, if you will, I forget what you would term it. It's not a constellation, but anyway, it's made up of seven, which mirror the geographical disbursement of the seven churches in Asia Minor, as I'll show right now. Okay, so here we can see the Pleiades grouping of well, they aren't even stars. They're actually, I think they're galaxies. I could be wrong. But it's the Pleiades grouping. And no, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should look this up. I apologize. It's, I learned this before, I'm sure, and I can't remember everything, I guess. Well, anyway, as you can see, there is a symmetry between the geographic locations of the 12 churches. So for those that don't know, the first chapters of the book of Revelation, Jesus writes letters and grades the seven churches of Asia Minor. The only church of the seven that he said didn't have anything against them and would be spared the hour of tribulation, in other words, raptured, was the Church of Philadelphia, which is a serious warning for quote-unquote Christians. Saying that they're not quite up to par here and that they're not going to make the escape from the tribulation. The Church of Laodicea, and by the way, many people, including myself, believe that these seven churches, what Jesus wrote about them, is symbolic of the seven stages of church history, and therefore the Church of Laodicea describes the modern evangelical church. And when you read it, it most certainly does when you have a proper understanding of doctrine and soteriology, and you understand what the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day is, that's producing the bad fruit on the bad tree. That is the modern evangelical church. The Church of Laodicea, that thinks that it is in need of nothing, does not fear the Lord, really, which is what the Lord is looking for, really, and thinks it is in need of nothing, but does not realize, as Jesus said, blind, pitiable, naked, poor, and such that Jesus wants to vomit out of them out of his mouth. But Jesus, as Jesus said to this church, he reproves whom he loves, which will be the purpose of the tribulation, reproving them. He reproves whom he loves, and he is still knocking at the door, which is quite something because it says that, in other words, Jesus isn't inside this church. He is knocking on the door, and this church isn't letting him inside. They think he's inside, but they're not letting him inside the church. He's knocking on the door. This is the church, the American church, the Church of Laodicea, the evangelical church, the modern church, which doesn't only apply to the evangelical churches in America. America has spread this brand of Christianity around the world, and these churches around the world are likewise deceived. Literally, it is deception from Satan, their doctrine. For example, once saved, always saved. It is rooted in Gnosticism, which is satanic. Anyway, enough of the theology here. Make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel. If you are a Christian, you should recognize, in my opinion, once the prediction comes to pass, that will be the most important video on this channel for you. The 23 church signs video on this channel. Okay, so back to what I was saying here. So we see the parallel here, right? Between Pleiades and the 7 churches. Okay, now here is Revelation 15, and speaking of this sign, and I saw another sign in heaven. He's saying another because the first one was the Revelation chapter 12 sign, which was fulfilled in the night sky on September 23rd, 2017. As I'm saying, this sign will be fulfilled on the 9th of Av in 2024, and it was believed that this would be the case since 2017. Okay, and the reason why I say 2017 is because someone else discovered this connection, and I don't know when they discovered it. I think it would have been, you know what, I really don't know. The late Dan Matson had it on his website, and I'm not sure if he was the person that discovered it. He might have been, but it was discovered before even 2017, that's for sure. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 plagues, the last plague. So it's talking about 7 angels and them having 7 plagues. Well, Pleiades has 7 stars, right? Hinting at the 7 churches, which is another 7 in the book of Revelation. Well, it says that these 7 angels have the last 7 plagues. But then it talks later in this chapter about how these plagues are administered. When the 4 beasts give the 7 angels 7 golden vials or bowls, okay? Depending on the translation, they're 7 bowls full of the wrath of God, who liveth forever and ever. And then the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. So, and then the preceding chapters go on to describe each bowl being poured out onto the earth. So it's a bowl or a cup, if you will. So back to the sign in the night sky. We have here part of Taurus, Pleiades. Taurus is this sign, this big sign that's described in Revelation 15, as I'm saying. This gives us the 7s that were mentioned that I just talked about, but they were cups, bowls. Well, if you look at it, it's quite clear, in my opinion, that this is a cup with a little handle on it. So if it's a bowl, doesn't mean there can't be a little handle on the bowl that's used to pour it out. Because it's the angels that are administering it. These angels have hands, and they would be pouring them out. So how does the angel pour it out? Well, I believe it's because it's like a cup. This is symbolic of this. All right? And this is the beginning of judgment. Now, this will occur at the beginning of judgment, but the thing is, a lot of people that are interested in prophecy make the mistake, a very big mistake, of interpreting the events in the book of Revelation in chronological order. There's no such thing as the chronological order that the people claim there is. These 7 trumpets and 7 seals and the 7 bowls, they overlap. It's all allegory. It's all symbolism. I respect Chuck Missler, but the one thing he missed a lot. He was not as wise regarding prophecy as it might have seemed. He missed a lot. And one of the big mistakes is, he said the more he studied the more he studied Bible prophecy, the more literally he takes it. But the opposite should be the case when it comes to the book of Revelation. It's about learning what God is communicating through his symbolism. Well, anyway, they're all overlapping, and so we have here at what will be something like the beginning, because the solar flare, I believe, is the first trumpet as well at the same time. But it's occurring, as we can now see, with the first beginning of the bowl judgments as well. So they all overlap, right? And it's just a way for God, it's a method for God to tell what is happening through prophetic language. It's not meant to be taken literally, and not literally in terms of timing either. And speaking of not to be taken literally, neither is the 1,260 days or the 70th seven in Daniel chapter 9. The 70th seven began, there were a number of symbolic beginnings to the final 7 years in 2017, including the inauguration of Trump-et, when he was 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old, 77 days before he launched 50 missiles into Syria, and 59 is the 7th super prime number. And his inauguration was 73 days, which hints at 3 sets of 7, after he was elected by 77 electoral votes, which was exactly 73 weeks after he first symbolically descended the escalator in his Trump Tower, which was exactly 188 months after the 7.0 earthquake in Joshua Tree, California, because the Israelites, led by Joshua before the walls of security collapsed, blew trumpets, and Trump's presidency was synonymous with his border wall of security, which, by the way, the walls of security in Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake, hence the 7.0 earthquake in Joshua Tree, California. Okay, anyway. So you get what's going on here. This is the Revelation 15 sign. Now the 9th of Av is this date here, but what's neat about it is that Mars is in between Pleiades and Jupiter, but on reconsideration, that doesn't mean much. It's closest on the 15th and 14th. Okay, so anyway, like I'm saying, this is symbolic of the church, right? The 7 churches. This is symbolic of the meeting of the church, the conjunction. Because, for example, Jupiter-Venus conjunctions, the prophetic ones, have been symbolic of the rapture, the resurrection rapture. Well, anyway, I don't want to get too much off track here. But again, Jupiter symbolizes the king planet. It's the it's the largest planet, but it's also got what astronomers call the giant red spot. That's literally its name. And it's got stripes because it hints at Isaiah chapter 53, and by his stripes we are healed. And Jesus was flogged, and also the spear was stuck in him, and out of which poured blood and water. And that's why the giant red spot on Jupiter. Now, one last amazing thing to talk about here regarding Jupiter and how this 9th of Av date was known to be the big important date since, years ago, since 2016 or whatever. This 9th of Av will be the 30th anniversary of the day of the 9th of Av in 1994, when Comet Schumacher-Levy 9, that's its name, Comet Schumacher-Levy, the 2 men that discovered the comet, 9. It has the number 9 in its title, and that's because it pummeled Jupiter on the 9th of Av. It was the biggest explosion ever witnessed in our solar system. Prior to it was not known how big of an event visually, how big of a spectacle it would be, and it overwhelmed even the most non-conservative estimates. It was a big thing. It sent off big explosion, easily seen in the telescopes, right? So this was the 9th of Av. I forget the exact date. in 1994, but it's not actually relevant. What's relevant is that it was the 9th of Av. Because again, of what I explained earlier about the significance of the 9th of Av and these calamities occurring for the Jews on the 9th of Av, which is why the sun will explode on the 9th of Av, which will send a coronal mass ejection, which won't arrive for a couple of days. And when it arrives, it'll be the beginning of destruction. The first trumpet in Revelation chapter 8, for example, and the resurrection rapture after the power grid is knocked out, which may imply that those that will be raptured will not be so much noticed, which makes sense to me. This is the first fruits rapture. The bigger rapture will be on September 5th. And then the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ will be on October 12th, the Day of Atonement in 2024. And this has been known since 2016 as well. That the second coming would be in 2024 has been known since then with 100% certainty since then. And along the way, God has repeatedly confirmed this over and over. You have no idea how many times, countless times, God has confirmed this through his big picture of patterns, connections, and signs, which is only being explained on this channel. And the reason why this prediction, the prediction for the death of Jimmy Carter on July 1st, followed by James Earl Jones on July 5th, the reason for this prediction, make no mistake, it is to prove that this is God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. I know far better than you the reason why that God has provided this prediction and given me a voice through this prediction, is to tell you about his big picture of signs. And the center of this web, in other words, the predictions would not be possible without the center of the web, is the Day of Atonement in 2024, the date of the second coming. So case closed when the prediction comes to pass. No more debate. There is no 70th 7. It already began symbolically in 2017, like I was saying. All right? So, now, this 9th of Av sign here, the Revelation 15 sign, exactly 30 years after the 9th of Av, when, and by the way, it was the comet prior to it hitting Jupiter broke up into 21 distinct fragments, and they labeled them with the letters of the alphabet, and there were 21, which is 7 plus 7 plus 7, and the Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security collapsed on Jericho, which is symbolic of the walls of security collapsing on America, God's Gentile nation that he has blessed and had his hand on. One of only 2 nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God and founded on the Bible, Israel and America. Okay, so 30 years, because in the Bible, 30 years is symbolic of a king. And so it was known, since 2016, that the 30th anniversary of the king planet getting pummeled by the comet Schumacher-Levy 9 on the 9th of Av would be a 30-year countdown to the final 2 months before the second coming of the King of Kings. That's why the 30 years, which symbolizes a king, that's why the 30 years from the king planet getting hit by comet Schumacher-Levy 9 on the 9th of Av. And again, the 9th of Av is about how God pointing to the first and second temple's destructions in order to communicate to the Jews why they are being chased around the world on the 9th of Av for rejecting him, God, who was Jesus, who is Jesus. Okay. And so, okay, anyway, so this 9th of Av won't only be the 30th anniversary of the planet Jupiter being pummeled by the comet. It will also be the exact 110th anniversary of another prophetic sign in the night sky. Well, it was an eclipse, so I guess that would be the daytime sky. This was the eclipse that began World War I. This eclipse occurred at the beginning of World War I, and this is known as the World War I eclipse. Even at the time, it made the headlines talk about how it could be a sign from God because of the momentous event of World War I. How could this eclipse go over Europe at this beginning of World War I? But not only that, though, the location where it peaked, the greatest maximum of the eclipse, was right over this place in Tannenbaum, a place named Tannenbaum, if I'm saying it correctly, which is in today Poland, but at the time was part of the Prussian Empire. This is the location of the battle that was the only battle in all of the war, which lasted years, that had any consequence on the outcome of the war. Had the Germans, for example, fared a little better or a little worse, the war and the outcome would have been vastly different. This was the only battle that had any consequence. All the other battles were just trench warfare. Nothing really happened, right? There was no consequence in terms of the outcome of the war, except for this one place, which is where the eclipse went over. But the eclipse also traversed over all four of the empires that came to an end as the result of World War I. The Prussian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Turk Empire, and the Russian Empire. Okay, so these empires met their doom as a result of World War I, and this is where the eclipse went over. All right, and it's because the eclipse also went over Palestine. No, I'm sorry, it didn't go over Palestine. It went over the Middle East. It went over the Ottoman Turk Empire, which as a result lost the territory of Palestine, and which led to the League of Nations and the British Mandate, which led to the Balfour Declaration, which allowed the emigration of Jews back to the homeland of Israel, declared that Israel be a homeland for the Jews, Palestine. And that was the beginning of the restoration. It wasn't really the very, very beginning, which actually was in 1867. That's another story, though. And anyway, so you have the collapse of the Ottoman Turk Empire as a result of this World War I, which was pointed to with the eclipse, all right? Now, that was on the 9th of Av. This will be the 110th anniversary of that, this symbolic beginning of the restoration of Israel. When the disciples asked for the signs of his return, Jesus replied, talking about there being rumors of wars and nation rising up against nation. He was speaking of World War I, and he mentioned how it would be the beginning of birth pains. When a child is born, prior to it, there are these contractions and these birth pains that gradually become more and more frequent and more intense. So that's why Jesus used this metaphor of birth pains. This was the beginning of the birth pains of the restoration of Israel, which is birthing the Messianic age and 1,000 years of peace, during which Jesus will rule while he dwells in Jerusalem in the Temple Mount, in the temple on the Temple Mount, for the 1,000 years of peace. And so that's this, process of this restoration of the Jews back to Israel, which really began with the Balfour Declaration, which was the result of the Ottoman Turks losing their rule over the territory, I believe, after exactly 500 years. But so anyway, that was why World War I was so significant and why the signs pointed to this, including the eclipse. Well, again, we are talking about another sign in the sky exactly 110 years later. Now, 110 is a very important number in God's signs because the Israelites crossed into the promised land on the 10th day of the first month, the date 110, which hints at 110. Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, when he officially arrived as the King of the Jews, was also on the 10th day of the first month, Nisan 10, which again hints at 110. All right, and by the way, this is the reason why the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center towers, were 110 stories high, and why there were two of them. Two 110 stories high is symbolic of the second triumphal entry, if you will, the second coming. And also, Joshua died in the Bible at the age of 110 after he led the Israelites into the promised land on the date 110. And Joseph, who was also a type for Jesus, also died at the age of 110. Okay, so the number 110, in other words, is symbolic of Jesus. And that's why this 9th of Av is exactly 30 years after the King planet was pummeled by the comet Schumacher-Levy 9 on the 9th of Av, and why this 9th of Av is exactly 110 years after the beginning of the birth pains. Now, in God's signs, he pairs certain numbers together to confirm his signs, patterns, and connections. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses that confirm a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And one simple way in which you would provide a second witness for us, if we think about it, is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 110. And I know this because I've been studying his big picture of signs from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 6 years. But 9 and 10 because the number 9 is the most important number in God's signs, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment. And Jesus is coming to return as the judge, and we're talking about this sign on the 9th of Av in the constellation that in ancient astrology was symbolic of the coming judge. It's the conjunction with Mars which further confirms this. And so 9 and 110 are paired together too, which is why the 110 stories on 9/11 collapsed and engendered an earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where George Washington was first inaugurated at the symbolic beginning of the nation, on Wall Street. And Wall Street, as in Joshua and the Israelites that marched around the walls of security before they collapsed in God's judgment, and Joshua died at the age of 110, hence the 110 stories that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall and Wall Street. Wall Street was named after the 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. That's why 9 and 110. On the prophetic 20th anniversary of the collapse of the towers was the collapse of Afghanistan, and the iconic images of the big cargo plane taking off down the runway with Afghanis running after it and hanging onto it and falling from it. But if you look at that image again, you'll see a big number on the side of it. Its serial number. It's 1109, which is a pairing of 110 and 9. Which is why it was the 20th anniversary that Afghanistan suddenly collapsed. It pointed to 9/11 and the collapse of the 110 stories that cracked the foundation on Wall Street, named after the 9-foot-high wall of security. Furthermore, the Israelites blew trumpets, and they were led by Joshua, who died at the age of 110, and they went into the promised land at the date 110. And they blew trumpets in one long last trump before the walls collapsed in God's judgment. And on 9/11, God's trumpet, called into Channel 9 News and mentioned how his tower on Wall Street had become the tallest tower in Lower Manhattan. Okay, so this is like the ultimate pairing of 9 and 110. This 110th anniversary on the 9th of Av, of the beginning of the birth pains, which in other words symbolizes the end of the birth pains and the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ. All right, now I think we have just one more thing to talk about here, which is also amazing. But we have a prophecy in Revelation chapter 17 that speaks of 7 kings and an 8th king. And it says that this 8th king was, is not, and will be again. And when he comes again, or when it becomes again, people will marvel at it. Now, the primary fulfillment of this, the 7th king is Pope Francis, and the 8th king, which is described as being a beast that was, is not, and will be again, is a revived Roman Empire, a conglomeration of the Western nations with Rome as its seat of power. Rome was stripped of its temporal powers by Napoleon, and so it was, and then is not, and will be again, when Rome becomes politically powerful again, with the rise of the apostate Pope Francis. That's described in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Okay, so that's the primary fulfillment of it. I won't get into any more details. I've already done it, in fact, in another Jimmy Carter video. But there's a secondary sub-level, a different level, simply a symbolic, because God is very creative and he can do whatever he wants with his signs, and he can have multiple layers. This isn't the literal primary fulfillment, but it's a secondary fulfillment on a lower level, if you will, okay? So just take it for what you will, but it is true, which is that Jimmy Carter is symbolic of the first of the 7 kings, which is why he was inaugurated in 1977. This leads us to the 7th president since then, Jimmy Carter 1, Reagan 2, Bush Sr. 3, Clinton 4, Bush Jr. 5, Obama 6, Trump 7. And Trump was inaugurated, Carter was inaugurated in 77, and Trump, the 7th of these kings, was inaugurated at the age of 70 years old, 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old, 77 days before he launched 59 missiles into Syria, and 59 is the 7th super prime number, and his inauguration was 73 days after he won by 77 electoral votes, and I just went into that. So it's in other words a confirmation that Trump is the seventh king here, symbolically. Okay, just symbolically. And the reason for this symbolic secondary sub-level fulfillment, if you will, is simply to point out how Obama, the 8th king, was, is not, and will be again. He was the president, isn't the president, and will be the president again. And that has been what Trump has been trumpeting essentially all along in terms of God's signs. He's been trumpeting the end times and the Antichrist. How did Trump become popular? What coincided with Trump's rise politically in the first place? It was calling out Obama for not being born in America and for demanding his birth certificate. Trump was trumpeting the unconstitutional president and Antichrist. Which is why Obama becomes the 8th. Now, okay, Biden is, the so-called president, but he isn't. He's just a puppet. He's just a figure person. And everyone knows that now, but I've known that even before he was elected, that he would step down because of his age and make his old pal Obama the president again. I knew that even before the 2020 referendum. Okay? And because of God's signs. And I knew this would be how Obama would become the president again, through being appointed instead of elected, thus overcoming the 22nd Amendment, which restricts someone from being elected more than twice. Now, will the Supreme Court go for that? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder about a few of the so-called conservative justices, but what I also think is going to happen is that the reason for the propaganda on this about the Supreme Court from the wicked, evil, satanic political cult of the left and the satanic left mainstream media, why they have been putting out propaganda on the Supreme Court is because I do believe they intend to stack the court, just like Roosevelt did, the 32nd president, which is why the name Obama equals 32 in simple English gematria. And 32 is 4 times 8, which hints at the 48th president, which is what Obama will be after Michelle becomes the 47th president. And also, Roosevelt was the only president who served more than 2 terms, just like Obama will. And so Roosevelt stacked the court in order to push through all of his New Deal agenda, which made him pretty much a socialist dictator. No one wants to call him that because he was the hero of World War II. But he was no friend of democracy. And Republicans hated him at the time for good reason. And so anyway, so what I'm saying is that what's very interesting is this secondary layer of this prophecy. And it points to the 7th king, Trump-et, God's trumpet, President Trump, who was the 45th president. And this is why this 9th of Av, well, it's not the 9th of Av. The sign of the Revelation 15 sign will be on the 15th of August, and the power and the coronal mass ejection will hit late night on the 14th or 15th, okay? So, and August 15th is 45 days after the predicted death of Jimmy Carter. Okay, so again, with this 7 kings secondary fulfillment of this prophecy, Jimmy Carter is pointing to the 7th king, the 45th president, which is why the beginning of the end times, if you will be 45 days, or rather I should say the last trump, the resurrection rapture, will be 45 days, as in the 45th president, after the death of Jimmy Carter. Because Jimmy Carter, again, is pointing to the 45th president through this prophecy. And the last trump is a phrase the Apostle Paul used in regards to the resurrection rapture, which is why the resurrection rapture will be 45 days because of Trump at the 45th president after the death of Jimmy Carter. Now, also, August 15th, and I've known this long before this video, and I'm making this video on the day of all of this being discovered, the same day. But what was known for quite a while now is that, because again, at the beginning of this video, I said that I believed the sun would erupt on the 13th and that this would also be the day of the rapture. But now I know that it takes a couple of days for the coronal mass ejection to reach Earth, and that will be when the rapture is. But anyway, What I have known and didn't quite know how to fit properly into the puzzle is that August 15th will be the 45th anniversary of the release of the movie Apocalypse Now. The movie Apocalypse Now is pointing to the now beginning of the apocalypse, which is now known to be 45 days after the death of Jimmy Carter, and August 15th, 45 days after the death of Jimmy Carter, will be the 45th anniversary of the movie release of Apocalypse Now, which cost $45 million to make. The movie Apocalypse Now first came onto my radar in terms of prophetic signs after the prophetic sign involving P. Diddy on March 25th, 2024, when the FBI raided his homes, which is explained in the Apocalypse Now video on this channel, the details of all of this, which is amazing. You need to watch that video. But it made me look at P. Diddy, and it was discerned that his epic video named Victory was a prophetic sign. This video, Victory, is 8 minutes long. It's known for being a long video. It's like a mini movie, if you will, and it's apocalyptic. P. Diddy is being chased around. It's nighttime. It's apocalyptic. It's in the future, in an apocalyptic future. It's a reminiscent of the movie Running Man. So this movie is apocalyptic, and in this video, the video is apocalyptic, and in this video stars Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper, who starred in this apocalyptic video named Victory, starred in the movie Apocalypse Now. Okay? And that's how the movie Apocalypse Now came onto the radar, because I realized that through P. Diddy, he was pointing to his apocalyptic video starring Dennis Hopper in order to point to the movie Apocalypse Now. And that was realized, within a day or two after March 25th. Then came April 5th, the date 4-5, which hints at 45. And on that day, P. Diddy posted on social media a link to his video, Victory, which points to Apocalypse Now, which cost $45 million to make. And P. Diddy posted his video, Victory, and that's all his post was, because he was posting it in defiance of the ganging up on him in the media, rightly so, now we know. But anyway, him being charged, he was, fighting back, if you will, saying that he was going to be victorious, whatever. But he posted his video Victory on the date 4-5, which hints at 45. And the video points to Apocalypse Now, which cost $45 million to make. And not only that, $9 million of the $45 million was spent on promoting the movie, Apocalypse Now. The number 45 is the 9th triangular number. In a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 9th row is 45. The reason why it's significant that it cost $9 million to promote it is because that's an unusually significant amount. That's why it's mentioned on the Wikipedia page for the movie, for example. It's designed by God, in other words. And so on the date 4-5, which hints at 45, P. Diddy posted his video Victory, which hinted at the Apocalypse Now movie starring Dennis Hopper, which cost $45 million to make, 9 of which was spent on promotion. And on the 45th anniversary of this movie that cost $45 million to make will be the Resurrection Rapture and the beginning of the Apocalypse Now, shortly after the 9th of Av, when the sun erupts. And the movie poster for Apocalypse Now is a blood red sun and a sunset river, which could be interpreted as a river of blood. To close here, I just want to make sure that I said it. Maybe I forgot. I think I might have explained this, but we were talking about Daniel chapter 12 and these numbers of days until the end. We have a 1,290 days period until the end and a 1,335 days period until the end. When we add the 1,290 days to the day that the abomination was first taken in Israel, December 19th, 2020, we get July 1st, the date of the predicted death of Jimmy Carter, as was explained. When we add 1,335 days to the abomination first being taken in Israel, we get August 15th. The date of the resurrection rapture and the beginning of the apocalypse now. Again, the last verse of the last chapter of the book of Daniel is, "Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days." It's speaking about the resurrection rapture. And again, we've confirmed the significance of adding the 1,290 days, or it will be confirmed when Jimmy Carter dies as predicted on July 1st. Therefore, this is confirming that the resurrection rapture will be 45 days later and 1,335 days after the abomination was first taken in Israel. All right, there is actually one more thing that I need to add that's very, very important, actually. I alluded to, or I started to get into this, but then reconsidered, but I've reconsidered again and remembered that this is very important and is relevant. Because just last night, so this information that's in this video, this 1,290 days connection, which by the way, I owe credit to Steve Fletcher 222 YouTube channel, and him and the people that he's collaborating with that have pointed out this 1,290 days connection. They don't know that Jimmy Carter is going to die on July 1st. They're expecting something though. And so the thing is that last night, just last night, I was inspired to look up Laura Branigan, the singer from the 1980s whose hit song was Gloria, a very prophetic, important song that God used in his prophetic signs in 2019 with the St. Louis Blues and their Stanley Cup run, and how they used this song in their locker rooms, and it became the anthem after their wins, became the anthem of St. Louis during this period, Gloria. There's so much to say about that. I could talk to you about an hour about the St. Louis Blues sign or more. It's very, very important, but that's already been explained in the hockey heart attack video. If you are able to find it, I highly, highly recommend going and searching for that video. But anyway, so Laura Branigan came to mind, and I looked, and I had earlier learned that her other hit song, Self-Control, was important. But now that the bigger picture has become clearer since I last thought about Laura Branigan, which would have been late last year, I thought to look it up again, and sure enough, it's very important. So the song Self-Control, which is a very dark, hedonistic song, and so you get if you don't remember the song, it's, you know, she's losing her self-control. She's a creature of the night. She hasn't got the will to try and fight. Okay, and apparently I just read on Wikipedia that someone said that the song was written about searching for. Anyway, never mind. So the point is, though, is that this is symbolism for what is coming, which is demonic possession, people losing their self-control. And those that will be demonically possessed are those that have taken the thing. And today it was learned, courtesy of Steve Fletcher, it was brought to my attention with a video that he made that December 19th was the first date in which someone in Israel took the thing. I had prior to this been focused on the first date that someone took the mark of the Antichrist in the US, which arguably, I'm sure, is a more important date in general in terms of God's prophetic signs, because there's so many profound connections. Anyway. So December 13th, 2020 is the date that the first Israeli took the thing, including, I believe, the leader of Israel. And what I was about to start explaining was that was a date that I already knew was a prophetic sign. And coincidentally, last night I was thinking that it's so amazing how God works, because just last night, literally, before I went to bed, I was thinking there should be another prophetic sign on that date, but I don't know what it is. And then the next morning, a friend of mine sent the Steve Fletcher video, and then this happened. This is how it works. Over and over, God aligns these things like this learning. Okay, so the sign that occurred on December 19th, 2020 that I already knew about, which I was starting to get into, which was the double, this was the time in which there were two SpaceX Dragon capsules docked at the International Space Station. That was news. It was news at the time. This was still 2020, so it wasn't like an everyday thing that a SpaceX Dragon capsule had docked at the space station. But there were, at this time, two docked at the space station, and this made it especially newsworthy. And that was symbolism for the two antichrists that are described in Bible prophecy. Revelation chapter 13 speaks of two antichrists, for example. Okay, and so of course the dragon is a metaphor for the Antichrist used in Revelation chapter 12 and Revelation chapter 13, because the second of the two Antichrists, Barack Obama, is said to speak like a dragon. All right, so we had the two SpaceX, and X, by the way, in SpaceX is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. Speaking of which, this was the day that the first Israeli took the mark of the Antichrist, and as I explained earlier, X is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, and SpaceX is also symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, and SpaceX and Elon Musk, in the context of a sign for the mark of the Antichrist, is symbolic of transhumanism, which is what the thing is. Okay, and, well, okay. Changing one's chromosomes, which are symbolized by an X. Okay, but there was more to this. On December 19th specifically, on this precise date, because I believe the SpaceX Dragon capsules were docked together at the space station for more than one day. But December 19th, 2020 specifically was this very interesting sign in which there was this new device, not a device, but it was a I don't know, a thing, okay? It was a thing. It wasn't a device, it wasn't a contraption, because it was a large thing that is being installed or was installed on this date for a new method of docking at the space station. It was the installation of a new airlock named the Bishop Airlock. I forget the name of the company that produced this, but they named this new innovation for docking at the space station, they named it the Bishop Airlock. And the company claims that the name Bishop is inspired by chess because of the way that the airlock works. It has something to do with moving diagonally, and that's how a bishop moves on the chessboard. But either they are lying or it's 100% from God. If they are lying, it's still from God, it's just that they knew all along the true meaning of the name bishop. Or it's concealed and they really don't know, and they actually sincerely named it after the chess piece bishop, but I doubt it. I think it's a tongue-in-cheek thing that's a secret within the company, but I could be wrong. They might be completely oblivious to the fact that the name bishop is the name of the character, the android, artificial intelligent character. Well, you know what an android is. It's a robot that is like a human in science fiction. In the movie, the biggest, most important aliens movie of all of history, the movie Aliens. There was Alien, and then the sequel was Aliens, which was far bigger than the original, although the original was a popular movie too. But the movie Aliens, I believe, may have been the biggest movie of the year in terms of sales. I could be wrong about that. I forget. It's not relevant. I mean, it is relevant because God works that way to confirm his signs. This was a historic movie in terms of horror. Well, you know what? Maybe I should just read it a little bit from the Wikipedia page for Aliens. Okay, so Sigourney Weaver was nominated for Best Actress at a time when science fiction genre was generally overlooked for this for this category of award. The movie was one of the highest grossing films of 1986, and Aliens is now considered among the greatest films of the 1980s and among the best science fiction, action, and sequel films ever made, considered equal or better to Alien, the first movie in the series. It is credited with expanding the franchise's scope with additions to the series' backstory and factions such as, okay, so anyway, it's a significant movie in American movie history. Now, and it was directed by James Cameron, another man that God is using in his prophetic signs, including his movie The Abyss, which is also about aliens. God has used this, but I have already written the script for another video regarding how his movie The Abyss is prophetic. Also, James Cameron directed Titanic, a very important movie in God's prophetic signs. Okay, so anyway, the point is that the climactic scene of the movie Aliens is when the last alien, the mother of the aliens, because it's in the plot, there is the queen, you could say, of the aliens who's laying the eggs, which hatch and later and, hatch aliens, but she's the queen. So anyway, Sigourney Weaver is having a battle with the queen of the aliens species on the ship in space. And as a last-ditch effort to survive this battle, Sigourney Weaver tells the android character, who no longer has a bottom. He's only, his bottom part was cut off. He's just arms and a head and a chest. But he drags himself across the floor, the android, and pulls the lever, opening the airlock and letting all of the air out of the bay, the whatever you want to call it, the area in which the characters are in on the spaceship. And this thus flushes everything out into space that's not locked down. Sigourney Weaver is hanging on to something, And so is the android named Bishop, while the alien is flushed out and then is spat out into space. And this is the climax of the movie Aliens. Okay, so in other words, in the movie Aliens, the character Bishop saves the day with the airlock. Okay, and that's why I have a hard time believing that the company didn't name their airlock after Bishop from the movie Aliens, and instead named it after the chess piece, okay? But the point is that it is a prophetic sign. That ultimately is communicating, like other signs in God's big picture of signs, that demons will soon make them manifest themselves openly, pretending to be aliens. And the Antichrist, Pope Francis and Barack Obama, will be all for this. And Pope Francis will claim that the aliens have made him the ambassador for the world. Now, earlier, I think in this video, I mentioned that May 2nd was the beginning of the final 1,260 days, although I could be confused with the video that I made yesterday. But anyway, that day was May 2nd, and that was the splashdown of the SpaceX crew. Long story short, that was symbolic. The Dragon capsule with the Dragon crew splashing down was symbolic of the beginning of the final 1,260 days. That is described in Revelation chapter 12 when the dragon and his minions, his fallen angels, are thrown down from heaven to earth, which is what is symbolized when the Dragon capsule and the Dragon crew fall from the second heaven, outer space, and splash down on earth. Okay, and so that was exactly 19 weeks after the 19th of December in 2020, the Bishop Airlock Day. That was the day that the Bishop Airlock was installed onto the space station. And now we know it was also the day that the first Israeli took the thing, the mark of the Antichrist. The exact 19 weeks is relevant because it hints at 9/11, and Revelation 9/11 is symbolic of the fallen angels crossing over into the earthly realm and pretending to be aliens. Also, it is 133 days, and that hints at the 44th semi-prime number, which identifies the second of the two antichrists, the 44th president. Okay, so anyway, and then, 133 days later, which hints at the 44th president, we have the beginning of the final symbolic 1,260 days that ends on the Day of Atonement, October 12th, 2024, the day of the second coming, when the antichrists will be defeated by Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so back to what I was saying about Laura Branigan. What I had learned last night is that the song Self-Control, again, all of this is leading to demonic possession of those who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. And that's what is alluded to with the name of the song and the lyrics of the song, Self-Control, which was released on April 19th, 1984. Okay, it was released on April 19th, 1984, exactly 440 months before December 19th, 2020, which obviously hints at the number 44, the 44th president. And then in turn, December 19th, 2020 is followed with 133 days, which hints at the 44th semi-prime number. And that is a second witness to the 440 months connection and vice versa. Okay, well, the thing is that in God's signs, the number 188 is used in the correct context, in the relevant context, for connections, because the 188th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word woe exclamation mark. It's the word that means woe exclamation mark, used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. And when the aliens arrive and when the Pope announces that they have made him the ambassador for the world, that will be a massive woe. And 188 weeks exactly after December 19th, 2020, is July 27th, 2020, Aliens Day. Something is going to happen that will be the beginning of this Antichrist period, and something significant related to the fifth trumpet in Revelation chapter 9, when the fallen angels cross over into the earthly realm. Something is going to happen. I don't know what it is. It may even only be something symbolic. And what I mean is that although God is pointing to this date with demonic possession symbolism, such as this song, Self-Control, it doesn't mean that everyone is going to become demonically possessed on this date. Just something to that effect that will ultimately lead to people becoming demonically possessed will happen on July 27th. My guess is that Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived. Somehow, that's what I think is going to happen. But, okay. And that date, July 27th, 2024, will be exactly 188 weeks after the Bishop Airlock prophetic sign, on the day that the first thing was taken by an Israeli, and it is the thing that is leading to demonic possession. Even Revelation chapter 9 says that only those of the certain group will be affected by the sting, which is the symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, the thing that's, thinged into people, right? It's like a stinger. Think about it. It's like a stinger, right? That's why the locusts are stinging and the scorpions are stinging. Or the horses with tails like scorpions that sting in Revelation chapter 9. It's because it's hinting at the mark of the Antichrist. Anyway, and also it says that these people will wish and seek death but won't be able to find it, and that's because they will be demonically possessed. They will be like zombies. They may even want to die, as the prophecy says, but won't be able to. Okay. And that something symbolic to this effect will happen on July 27th, exactly 188 weeks, which is woe, after the Bishop Airlock sign day and the first day of the thing in Israel. The reason why all of this is relevant and why it needed to be brought up in this video too with Jimmy Carter is that, as explained in the other videos, especially the must-watch Jimmy Carter UFO video on this channel, it's the video titled The UFO President, Jimmy Carter. He is the UFO president. He filed an official report with International UFO Bureau in 1973 regarding his UFO sighting. As a supposed Christian, Jimmy Carter should know better, and that there aren't aliens, because that's impossible. Because if one has a true biblical worldview, which those that believe it's possible for there to be aliens don't have, they'll know the truth is that it is impossible because God became a man, and the center of God's creation is man. God didn't hopscotch around the universe, dying on crosses for the sins of aliens also. Okay, so anyway, that's why this is all relevant, because, again, the date, December 19th, 2020, the date that the first Israeli took the thing, is 1,290 days before it is predicted that Jimmy Carter will die on July 1st, but December 19th, 2020 is also exactly 188 weeks to UFO Day, and Jimmy Carter is the UFO president. All right. This now brings up something new. I thought the video was over once again, but I just remembered now, and I hadn't thought about this particular prophetic sign for probably, quite a long time. But December 19th, 2020 is exactly 10 years after what is called in pop culture, in sports, in NFL sports culture, the miracle at the New Meadowlands. Okay, it's the miracle at the New Meadowlands because they had just started playing in the New Meadowlands Stadium, the New York Giants football team. Now, giants are symbolic in God's signs of aliens. For one thing, I mentioned earlier how the flood judgment was for the reason that the chromosomes of the human race had been corrupted by the giants. Okay, I mentioned how it had been corrupted, but it was from mixing with the giants, and this is symbolism, or rather the giants are a metaphor for fallen angels. Okay, so as strange as it sounds, I do believe that will also be a part of the end times, people having sex with demons. It already goes on a lot, actually. Well, it does. This isn't a new thing, is what I'm saying. But this will come out more with the masses in the culture soon enough. That said, that's giants, okay? So giants in God's signs are symbolism for the demons that are fallen angels, pretending to be aliens. That's what giants symbolize. The New York Giants, the San Francisco Giants, giants in general, okay? There's other instances of the symbolism of giants other than these two professional sports teams. But the miracle at the New Meadowlands prophetic game and incident involved the Giants, and they lost the game on the final play of the game, which should have ended the game. The punter didn't kick the ball out of bounds, and the Philadelphia Eagles, and there's a big rivalry between Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Giants, which makes part of this story the miracle because of the rivalry, the miracle at the New Meadowlands. Okay, you can go onto Wikipedia, for example, and you can find a page that's miracle at the New Meadowlands. It's a big thing, all right? And so in the final play, I forget the player's name. It's not relevant, but it's player number 10 for the Eagles. He catches the ball, he muffles the ball and scrambles to get it back, retreating back to his 30-yard line in an error, basically. But that error caused the Giants' coverage to get messed up, which allowed this player to circle around and then ultimately run the entire football field for a touchdown at the very end of the game as time expired to win the game. This is why it's the miracle, because they were down by whatever points, and then the touchdown won the game for them. The Eagles, in other words, should have lost this game. That's why it's a miracle. Now, the thing is that Philadelphia is one of the 7 churches that are written to by Jesus in the book of Revelation. The Church of Philadelphia, incidentally, is the only church that said by Jesus that would be spared the hour of tribulation, in other words, raptured. And in the book of Revelation, the number 144 is symbolic of those who will be raptured. Well, December 19th, 2010, the date of the miracle at the New Meadowlands, is exactly 10 years. You know what? The number 144 isn't relevant here. Sorry. It's actually 10 years, but it's 120 months, okay? That is relevant in terms of giants, though, because in that beginning section of Genesis chapter 6 that's describing the giants mingling with humans and corrupting the chromosomes, God says that he will not strive with man forever and will give the man 120 years before the flood. And so that's why this period of 120 months symbolizes this. It's in context, the number 120 of giants in Genesis chapter 6. Okay, so the miracle at the New Meadowlands is exactly 120 months before the Bishop Airlock sign and the first thing taken by the Israeli, which is the mark of the Antichrist, which corrupts one's chromosomes. That's the connection. It's amazing, right? So giants symbolize aliens. Giants also symbolize corrupted chromosomes. And 120 months later, we have the Bishop Airlock sign, which is symbolic of aliens. And the mark of the Antichrist, which corrupts people's chromosomes, was taken for the first time in Israel. Not only that, though, this 120 months connection is exactly 10 years. And it was player number 10. The miracle at the New Meadowlands play is a play by player number 10, which confirms as a second witness to this 10 years connection exactly to December 19th, 2020. And I knew about this 10 years connection in December of 2020 at the time of this prophetic sign. But it is only now that it all fits into the bigger picture. Because again, from the December 19th, 2020 Bishop Airlock sign and the mark of the Antichrist sign, it is exactly 188 weeks to Giants' Day. So 120 months, which is 10 years from the Giants game involving number 10 to the Bishop Airlock, and then 188 weeks exactly to Giants' Day, when demons cross over into the earthly realm, the fallen angels, the giants. It's so amazing, okay? And so that's why this had to be included in this video too. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, Trump-prediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the bitchute.com or the odyssey.com channel. and do it now in case you aren't able to later.